I've been asked to talk about some trends in the market. And so I'm going to talk about a few. Not to do the death by PowerPoint, I didn't, well, I guess they're called bullets, so that would be death by PowerPoint, right? So I just sort of listed them and want to talk about them a little bit more later. But even go back 20 years, there was a need in the market to organize content. And most databases at that time were organizing strings of data, use the technical term text in general. And when I went to try to tackle asset management in '97 and began to ask, well, where's there a relational database that can manage graphics? There really weren't any. There was a product called Kudo Image Browser, another one called Shoebox, which didn't necessarily encourage me that was the great way to go. But in terms of a couple trends, let's first talk about concept to reality. So all of us in the room in one way or another are working on manufacturing products. And one of the pressures in the market is to inform supply chain, our marketing teams, regulatory bodies, and others about that product literally before it exists. I haven't manufactured it yet, but the FDA wants to know exactly what I'm going to say in the product insert leaflet or on the package. I haven't manufactured it yet, but somebody wants to see a 3D of it, or my sales team wants to go into a retailer and kind of show what the product looks like, what it feels like, all before it really exists. So there's a notion of bringing the concept to reality, but knowing enough about the concept before it's a reality that the two begin to really overlap and merge and match, so that when you manufacture the real good, there's no surprise because I've already kind of seen it, touched it, felt it in essentially a virtual space that we're going to talk about in the web browser and other places. I think a trend is to move data accuracy more towards the front of the process. So there's two kinds of workflows. You could talk about late binding workflow or early binding workflow. In late binding workflow, you're working on the art, but you're trying to get that final data right at the back end. And what we're trying to do is get accurate data further upstream so that as people look at an evolution of a product, they have accurate data earlier, and that lets them make more informed decisions during the collaboration. So we're trying to move accuracy upstream so that accuracy arrives earlier. And one of the ways we do that is integrating with ERP, PLM, other systems of record in this space. Excuse me. I would say another is reuse. A lot of people in this room have talked about reuse. How do I pick up the right asset? How do I know it's the right one? How do I know that the data that surrounds the asset is the right one? Guys, how many people have heard the term a singularity? A few of you, okay. So singularity has a very real meaning in astrophysics and others, but it has a very important meaning for us today. So I'm going to read you a couple descriptions. So one of singularity is kind of scary that you might have heard Elon Musk talking about. So the technological singularity is the hypothesis that the invention of artificial superintelligence will abruptly trigger runaway technological growth, resulting in unfathomable changes to human civilization. So there's one to keep you up at night, right? Small, just a small issue. Yes. As I've looked at trends in the industry, and I know many of you come either directly from a print background, or you've certainly been tied to print for a long time. So let me throw this one out. So in 1992, I worked at a large pre-media firms, Shock Incorporated. Some of my great friends are here. Hey, Sharon, I didn't see you already. So we were told, working in the industry, that when digital plates came out, like the world was going to end, like unfathomable changes. And so it was 92. And so we knew this was coming, but we didn't know exactly when. When were our customers really going to say, we're going to digital plate, and we're going to cut out film and go digital? And so it actually was about 2003, maybe late 2003, early 2004, where we went from 20% of our customers using digital plates, which had grown really slowly. And suddenly, I'd say within an 18-month span, that 20% went to about 70 or 80%. So there was a singularity, there was a seminal moment with digital plate. And what I'm getting at is, in trends of technology, and we're talking about trending, you can often know something's going to happen, but the key is when. When is it going to happen? We didn't know it was going to be 2003. I actually thought it would be like late 90s. So a lot of these changes that have these, I guess we use the term hockey stick curves, where you're moving along, and suddenly you see a real uplift or change. So some of the trends I want to talk about, think about in your space, at your company, not just that it's going to happen, because I think some of them are self-evident. It's when is it going to happen, and I'll go through that in some of these others. So I talked about, I like these words. I picked these words up from you guys. So 2 words. One was a digital twin. So people saying, I need a digital twin of the product before it's made. I want to show it to people, like I was talking about a little bit earlier. Another term is I want blue. This is a client term. I want blue's got to be a beacon, meaning I've got this artwork thing going on, and it's like the analogy I've used is that you see a duck swimming across the surface of a pond, and then the duck goes underwater, and you're like, where is it? And then it pops up somewhere else. And artwork can be like that to the rest of your organization. They know it went in there, or they know something's going on in there, but nobody knows exactly when it's going to pop up or what's going on underneath the waves. Like, are things going well? Is the duck catching the fish? What's going on under there? And so the beacon is the idea that through integration, Blue can broadcast what is going on with the artwork. Is it on hold? What's the status? If I've got a wave of 30, how about the 29th one, the 28th one? Where is it? And can I kind of drill to that information and can inform the supply chain or my marketing team or my regulatory team about the status? So I kind of think of it as a beacon. It's got to broadcast out to the rest of the organization, not every single thing that's going on, because as Ali pointed out, it's highly complex, but statuses that basically inform other systems in the chain. All right, so I'm going to have to move a little quicker. This next trend, I think, is very important, is this flow of data. So many of our customers will say in a quiet moment that the most reliable source of data in their organization for packaging data is actually the Illustrator art file. It's the thing they trust the most because the most people in the organization have vetted it, looked at it, said that's right for this market, this regulatory copy. So if you go to the typical IT person in some of your large organizations and you actually say out loud, my system of record is Adobe Illustrator, it's quite frightening to many people in the IT organization. And so, but it is a reality. It's the most vetted thing. And it's also if it's controlled right, it can be version controlled, it can be stored with all the right metadata. But essentially what we're doing is taking a lot of upstream data, often Excel files, Word files, and we're cutting and pasting data, building it onto a piece of artwork, and then routing and vetting the data, late binding. Remember I used that term earlier, late binding. And so what we're starting to see is earlier binding. Actually, let's make the package with the right data and then route it, and then it's going to be right first time more often. So the notion, the flow is like this. Right now, a lot of the flow is off-pack and out to inform. And what we really want is, in many cases, system of record data, ERP data, PLM data, regulatory system data, and other data to flow onto the package. And then there's some data, I would say, like marketing statements, often called why buy. So let's say I'm going to market a product and I want to say, well, in the convenience store, let's tell the consumer to buy it for this reason. And in the big box store, let's use this reason. In the grocery store, this reason. Those things evolve with the package and often in Blue. They're being talked about and changing literally while we're developing the package, particularly in over-the-counter pharma market and in the brand market. So some of the data will evolve, but we get as much valid data as early as we can. And so I'm kind of just thinking about that reverse of flow. That's one of those singularities. Don't know exactly when it's going to happen. It's not going to happen at every company in this room at the exact same time, but it's definitely happening, and Blue has to be ready for it. And if we're not awake up at night on that, we should be. And I think we're thinking a lot about that. And when I do the demo with Eric, we're going to show you some data directly flowing onto Pack, basically building artwork from a data structure. Okay, let me go to the next one. So, high quality interactive images for augmented and virtual reality. So if I stood up here and gave you 6 trends and you nodded yeah to all of them, I wouldn't even be doing my job. I got to do some stuff that you're like, what the hell is that guy talking about? Then I'm probably, I want to get into a place that's a little controversial. Why are you thinking that? That's not what I'm seeing. And so this is probably one of those. So I worked with a company we have a partnership with where there was a product in Blue, and we would pass the product into their system, put on a set of virtual reality glasses, and then you could look at the table and the glasses would read this surface. It would actually know that this is a surface here, and then I could take the product And in my glasses, I would see like a box of Cheerios sitting on that table, and then with my hand, I could make it larger or smaller on the table. And if I pushed it to the edge of the table, it would fall on the floor. But it's all in my glasses, right? Now, how to use that for product? Well, imagine the difference between pharmaceutical, where it might be instructions, use. There's probably a lot of training that I could do for either my salespeople or even end users of the product. And then think about it in consumer products. So how do we get that image, and how do we know that image is right and that it has accurate data on it? Well, typically, when we're going through a blue workflow, we get this moment when the artwork is approved. Hopefully it's not cycle 9, right? Hopefully it's cycle 1 or 2, but sometimes it is cycle 6, 7, 8. And that data is right. And essentially, if you think about it, once you have that 2D art, the flat art, whether it's a carton, whether it's a flexographic bag, I can now take that and wrap it onto a CAD diagram, a computer-aided design, a wireframe, sometimes it's called, and then use that, maybe light it, create the right surfacing on it, and essentially build a 3D object. And this is something that Shock has been doing quite some time for a lot of our customers. So they'll take that approved 2D artwork. Now, the way the industry used to work is I would ship that. I would actually have to build it in manufacturing. It would go to a warehouse. Somebody would walk in the warehouse. I really know a customer that did this. You'll find this hard to believe. They go into the warehouse, and they take a box cutter, and they take a cart, and they carve it out and reach into the box and take one out and send it to a photographer who puts it on a piece of felt, who takes a photo of it, and then sends the photo over to India, where somebody opens it and keys the data off of the physical object and then puts it into a database. And now I built the product 6 weeks ago, and now I'm just finally getting a picture of a 3D object. What we really want to do is do that much, much sooner. So my trending here is the moment I have that 2D artwork, I want to within, I don't know, 24 hours, 48 hours, I need all my flavors, all my sizes, all my variations as a 3D object in one place, controlled, that I know is tied to my approved artwork, that I can begin routing out and discussing with the rest of my organization, my supply chain, my marketing partners, and my global supply partners. So I say augmented. I think augmented is probably a bigger opportunity than virtual reality. Virtual reality takes a lot of content design. Somebody's got to build a whole world to have complete virtual reality. But augmented reality can take a product and let it enter the physical space that we live and breathe and work in every day, and that's where we use products, right? We don't consume a box of Cheerios in the virtual world. We actually take the spoon and spoon it in our mouths. So augmented for product is probably easier to create, lower cost, and may have a higher impact on consumer perception and consumer behavior. So I'm an AR over VR guy. Gaming, no. But in terms of our space, I think augmented reality is really important. All right, let's see, a couple more trends. So now, fragmentation of regulations and compliance strategies. So there are a number of trends, even the Brexit, even the trends toward, in the United States, towards federalism, where states are, the U.S. government with Trump is probably going to have less national regulation, and there's going to be more opportunity for state regulation. So those of you that market products in the U.S., in particular food products, know that Vermont came up with a GMO bill, and consumer product companies all had to create special products to sell in Vermont. And so we see potential proliferation of that pattern in the next 3 to 5 years, not just in the U.S. but in other countries, that's going to simply complicate an already complex regulatory compliance environment. And it means that our systems will have to be more nimble, and we'll probably have to create even more products and respond to more regulatory changes, typically with the same staffs or smaller staffs than we have today, is kind of the financial reality. All right, 2 more trends. That one's kind of, this one's kind of, you probably know it's coming, but still the systems really have to be aware of this and be flexible to handle this one. Global brands continue to look for harmonization opportunities. So many of you in the room have talked to us. As Ali mentioned, we're in many different geographies, many spaces. And typically when we've rolled out Blue, we've found some regional harmonization, but not yet global harmonization on process. And then some of you that have been more aggressive found some real pushback from your regional organizations when you went to take a best practice process, not necessarily a U.S. process, it could have really been anywhere, the most mature process, and then try to move that mature process to other regions, and found there were probably some human change management issues, but even issues just began to crop up that maybe weren't even known before. So this is very difficult. So what the system has to be able to do, and I think I'll be able to show this a little bit with you, Eric, is you want to create a global process. Some of you heard the word global. It's global in nature. It has global features, but it also allows for local regulatory, local legal, and local marketing dynamics and conditions to be accommodated in the process. In other words, if you have a process, but you have kind of these micro extensions to the process that deal with a certain, let's say a small country regulatory environment, or the fact that legal is outsourced here but not outsourced there, or the fact that in small markets you don't know who's assigned to a project yet because you have, let's say, 6 people working in all of South America and they're always mixing and matching, and so you need a process there where you have a late binding of the person who's going to do the work. But in another market, it's always this person in this region doing this thing because it's a larger market. So that flexibility, that agility that you mentioned, Ali, that's really critical as we look at this harmonization. What it brings for us also is KPIs, the ability to measure these processes across the globe and bring enough harmonization so that there's meaning when I try to look at this brand versus that brand, this region versus that region, new product versus existing product, small change versus large change. All those things I want to really see on a KPI, but I need some notion of harmonization for that to be meaningful. Otherwise, it's arbitrary, and it actually can frustrate end users when they're being compared through a KPI to something that's an apple versus an orange. And the last trend that I had to talk about was just this. This will kind of tie back to some of the e-commerce and experience that we're talking about today. The idea that we have all these different content types, images, video now, consumer reviews, this romance copy, this evolving marketing copy that we're talking about. Information and structural content. We talked about 360-degree packaging views, and then of course the all-important ingredients. By the way, I'd mentioned this, I think I talked to you about it, Marion, last night for a moment. IBM and Microsoft are pouring a tremendous amount of research into trying to control the knowledge of ingredients from farm to fork if it's in food, or from source to product in pharmaceutical. And they're using, IBM in particular is using a, how many of you have heard of Bitcoin? Right, so Bitcoin is really popular in the criminal enterprise world. Drug trafficking, etc. But there's a technology that sits beneath Bitcoin called blockchain. And blockchain lets you build individual processes and string them together in such a way that it's very hard later to come back and fake that a process happened in the middle. So if I got 7 steps and I build the steps each at a time, and I come back and want to change step 6 later, it's almost impossible. You don't want to say impossible, but it's very, very hard to fake data. So IBM has 615 people working on blockchain technology for ingredient control and efficacy of source information as we move to market. So if you imagine this augmented reality space, if I could look at the package in my glasses or in my augmentation, it might be a tablet or a desktop device, and maybe if I hover over the ingredients, it shows me a map of all the farms where, let's say I've got oats, I can see all the farms that potentially source the oat. And then maybe if I scan with my phone the lot number, it will actually tell me which farm that was raised in. And potentially with this technology, everything that happened to that ingredient all the way to market. What truck it rode in, the license plate of the truck, the temperature, all along the way, if there was a sudden heat or freeze, anything like that. So managing these ingredients. And I think you guys all know in this room that that is where it's going. We have to know more and more and more about our products to share that data with our customers. So consumer transparency, that leads to e-tailing and retailing, and all of this content being moved in a consumable way to a human being that doesn't have all this technical knowledge. They just want to know, should I buy this for my child or not? Is this going to be healthy for me or my child? And then we already mentioned all of the changes that are happening in regulatory, and we're leading up to a little bit more of that. So